Greetings, fellow scientists. I'd like to welcome you all to the Wisconsin Science Festival online field trip, Finding Buried Treasure. Thank you for joining us today. We're ready to get started. My name is Dan from the Wisconsin Science Festival team, and we're here with special guests from the University of Wisconsin Geology Museum, Dave, Aaron, and Brooke, for this field trip experience. So how can you participate today? You'll notice that your picture and audio are muted and the chat isn't available. But if you have any questions you'd like to ask, you can use the Q&A feature. As soon as you have a question, go ahead and type it in right away and we'll ask the question out loud during the field trip. This field trip will be recorded, and as always, we ask that you do this and all activities at the Wisconsin Science Festival with the responsible adult. We'd also like to thank our sponsors and partners that help make the Wisconsin Science Festival possible. You can find out more activities and events during the festival at wisconsinsciencefest.org. With that, we're excited to get started. Take it away, Dave, Aaron, and Brooke.
Always with the mute. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Dave Lovelace. I am a research scientist at the UW Geology Museum. And I just want to say, I grew up in Wyoming, and growing up, I was playing in the rocks, just like my kids do here today in Wisconsin. And we're out poking around, and we find all sorts of fascinating things. And it was that creativity and interest of playing outside that got me interested in paleontology. In fact, it was later in my career, and basically when I started college, I was going in to be a nursing student because I loved medicine, I loved bones, and I found a passion when I took a geology course, and it just sunk in and I loved it. And I decided, you know what, this is what I want to do. And even better, when I came to Wisconsin to study geology, I picked a field area that was something near and dear to my heart back in Wyoming. And it happens to be where I lost my very favorite Boba Fett action figure. And I got to spend my entire college career looking for it. And I'm still looking for it. It's somewhere in Wyoming, but all sorts of buried treasure is out there. So I look for fossils, I look for information and stories of the past, and that little lost figurine I haven't found yet. Aaron?
Morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Kuffner. I'm a graduate student. I'm working with Dave in the Geology Museum at the Geoscience Department at UW-Madison. I've always been pretty interested in things like dinosaurs. Growing up, my grandparents, they were rock hounds, so they went around the country and collected a bunch of rocks, and they got some fossils, not a whole lot. They had a couple drawers full, which I guess kind of sounds like a lot. But I would always gravitate to those drawers and just like pore over those fossils for hours when I'd go over to their house. And my grandma didn't really care for them. She's like, oh, I don't like them. They're not that shiny. But I love them. And she left them for me. So I get to look at all those beautiful fossils all the time. But yeah, when I guess going to school, I didn't necessarily think I'd be going into paleontology, but I found Dave's lab and I was like, oh, I could actually make this into a career. So here I am. And I can't wait to share all that stuff with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Norstead, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Geology Museum. And I also grew up out west. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. And you'd think growing up in Alaska that my parents would be like super outdoorsy and we'd be like hiking and camping all the time, but that's not really true. I went hiking with friends and I loved to fish, but it was really when I started, I was probably 9 or 10 and I started really getting into protecting the earth and thinking about like how to keep the air clean and the water clean. And then I started, I loved being outside. I would garden with my mom and stuff. And then I started learning that there was this field called geology where I liked science a lot. And in geology, I was able to learn about chemistry and learn about physics and learn about biology, but it all kind of tied together. And I liked that a lot. So yeah, when I went to college, I decided that's what I wanted to study. And so then I figured out that I like to talk to people about this stuff a lot. And so when I came to the Geology Museum, my job is to do a lot of teaching about rocks and fossils. And so a lot of my job at the museum is showing people around and teaching them about the things that we have. So with that, I think we'll start entertaining some questions. And so you can put your questions in the Q&A there, and Dan will help ask those questions for us.
Yeah, so we got some questions coming in. If there's any questions at all, especially from the 3 videos that we sent ahead of time about digging up fossils, cleaning fossils, and then where do the fossils go, we can entertain questions about those too, and anything that comes into your mind. So we do have one question. Some people are really interested in the types of fossils that you find. What kinds of fossils have you found? And like, have you ever found a T-Rex bone or some like dinosaur from the movies? And then what other kinds of dinosaurs have you found, and why are they cool too?
All right, I'll touch base on this a little bit. Certainly, the first time that I went to the field, where I was asked to work in a dinosaur quarry, we were actually being filmed by Prentice Hall, who makes textbooks, and we were talking about how we find dinosaurs. And I had just learned, literally that day, that morning, how you find them. And you walk around and you're looking for little fragments of bone that have eroded out of the hill. So I'm explaining it to this camera crew about how you find things, and you just walk along and you say, oh, like a bone like this. And I literally picked up a bone. I'm like this is how you find bone fragments. And then we started working our way uphill and showing them how you trace it out until you can find where the bone is actually coming from in the rock. And I found a nearly complete Apatosaurus tail. That's the whole tail. So it's 80 bones. But there were 2 bones sitting there. And I was like brushing off the sand, and they were filming and going, can you go any faster? And I'm like, this is fast. And it was really fun. So I found a couple of Apatosaurs when I first started off. Those were very exciting. I've worked on Supersaurus. I excavated the second specimen of that. I worked with a number of students, and we've got to name a new dinosaur, Hesperornithoides meisleri, and it's this little paravian dinosaur. So it is a winged dinosaur, but it couldn't fly, but it did have small little wings, and that was from Wyoming as well, and we named that 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago, I think, something like that. And so that was an exciting little dinosaur, a little meat eater. But T-Rex bones, I haven't actually found any T-Rex material. I have found other dinosaurs from the late Cretaceous, like Triceratops, but the museum has done some pretty excellent adventures prior to me getting here. And so I think most people, in fact, I think, Aaron, you've worked on some of the T-Rex material here?
I don't think I've worked on any T-Rex material, but I've definitely worked on like a lot of Triceratops, like a lot of Triceratops. There's so much of it. But yeah, going back to, I guess, finding any fossils of movie dinosaurs. I haven't found any of movie dinosaurs. I've actually only dug up fossils in the late Triassic with Dave, and I don't think there are any dinosaurs featured in movies from the late Triassic, sadly. But there's some cool stuff back then still. There's some giant amphibians and like these weird relatives of crocodilians that we've been finding. It's really cool.
The neatest thing that I have ever found was I was working on a site in Canada, and we were finding big Allosaurus bones. So like, it looks a lot like a T-Rex. And I found this tiny little bone, and I was a little disappointed. Everybody's working on these big bones, and I found this tiny little bone, and I took it over to the scientist who was in charge of that site, and he freaked out. He was so excited because it turned out it was a mammal bone. And so it helps. Well, I was disappointed because it was so tiny. He thought it was great because it helped us learn about not just the dinosaurs that were living at the time, but all the other kinds of animals that were living there too. So it's not it can be the big showy things, but when we find other fossils, that helps us like understand the whole ecosystem.
So that's awesome. And so we have a follow-up question from Serena related to that, who wants to know, how can you tell what part of the animal or what animal you found? So like you said, you dug, you found this one little piece, and then you get really excited, and somebody might be like, what's going on? So like, how do you know what you found?
Comparative anatomy. I actually teach comparative anatomy, the lab here at UW-Madison. So we look at lots of different animals. Like behind me, you can see a bunch of cat skeletons, and there's like, I guess if you can see that over there, that's a sheep skull. That's kind of showing like different types of teeth and like how many teeth certain kinds of mammals have. I also have something right here. I have this, which is an actual dinosaur skeleton of a pigeon. So we look at the bones, and we kind of try to understand the shapes. So like the shapes have to do with like muscles that attach to them and move the bones in certain ways. So like flapping muscles in birds, or like where blood vessels are going, or like nerves from your brain. We can look at all of those things and kind of understand which bones come from where based on the features, the shapes that it has.
And Dave, did you have
I was gonna, I was just thinking at that, you looking at all those shapes and features. One of the things we do is we, compare all of these animals. So when we find a bone, you look at those, any feature you can find, and we actually have ways of plugging that information into computers, and it gives you a sense of where that belongs. So if we put all of these animals that we know real well, and then you find this random little bone, you can plug in the morphology, and it will tell you who it is most likely related to. And so in that way, we can figure out, sometimes we don't know. We know it's an upper arm bone because it has these morphologies, but we can't tell exactly what it is, but we know it's a dinosaur, or we know it's a turtle. But that program will help us really narrow down in what group it might belong to. And so that's how we really go about figuring out what dinosaur or what animal it is. Really, it could be any animal.
And Brooke, you said that you presented this to a scientist, the bone you found, and they knew by eye too. So is it also like, can you find patterns of experience, and like how can we look outside and look for patterns from the things we're finding outside?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, both Aaron and Dave kind of touched on this, that it's through experience of like, there's a saying in geology that the best geologist has seen the most rocks. And I think that's true with, fossils too. If you are interested in studying fossils, then looking at as many skeletons as possible and comparing them, because yeah, they can all it can be really confusing when you're starting to learn about this stuff. But I like to think of my kid, my 9-year-old loves to play Minecraft. And he can tell me so much stuff about Minecraft, right? Like he knows all the different characters, and I look at it and I'm like, I don't know, they kind of look the same to me. I don't really know what all their characteristics are, but it's the same thing. If you're really into fossils, you can study these skeletons and you start to learn, and your brain starts to get trained like, ooh, I know the difference between this upper arm bone and this upper arm bone because there's slight differences, and you can start to figure that stuff out. And so it can seem really confusing to start off, but just like you might be really into, playing the piano or Minecraft like my kid, and you can learn all of that stuff. It just takes a little practice.
And we've got some questions about, how do dinosaurs and fossils get their names? So, and have you ever named one, or where do the names come from?
And it's a good question. It's a combination of things. So there's a tradition in paleontology to use two languages, usually Greek and Latin, to name specimens. And so we'll get names like, for instance, the dinosaur that I got to help name, Hesperornithoides meisleri. It's two names, which is what we call the genus and the species. And so like we are the humans are Homo sapiens, and Canis latrans is the coyote. So each one has a genus name and a species name, and we call the whole thing kind of the specific the species name, but it has the genus too. So Hesperornithoides, Hesper is Western, and ornithoides is bird-like. And so this was the Western bird-like animal and then it was named meisleri after Howard and Helen Meisler, who were the landowners that donated the specimen to the public. And so it was in honor of them. So oftentimes species names, the last part gets named after a person or a place. There's a lot of that goes on. And I think now that has always been the tradition. You name it after the landowner, you name it after another researcher, somebody that you want to honor. And now I think the tradition is trying to go a little bit deeper and honor both native cultures around the world where the specimens are found. And so you'll get a lot of names that don't have Greek and Latin in them within the last decade, because they're really starting to use native languages and cultural references. So a lot of the new dinosaurs have those languages to describe them. So they don't end in saurus or the kind of classic names, Allosaurus, Apatosaurus, Tyrannosaurus. They all end in saurus, which is this, holdover from the past. But yeah, and we're in the process now of naming a few new animals. So it's really fun and exciting to kind of figure out what name best represents the specimen.
And Clara wants to know, where have you found the most fossils? And I think a lot of people are also interested in like, where do you find fossils? And yeah, where maybe are the most or a good chance of finding a lot of fossils?
Do you want me to tackle this? I don't want to just say, go ahead. Brooke, why don't you?
Well, one thing is, when you're looking for fossils, the first thing is like, well, what kind of fossils are you looking for? And so I bet some of you are interested in finding fossils here, like near your house. And so the best spots in Wisconsin are in the southern part of the state, from La Crosse over to Sheboygan, kind of that lower half of the state, because there's a lot of rocks down here that are limestone and sandstone, and those were laid down underneath an ocean about 450 million years ago. So while you can't find dinosaurs, this is before the dinosaurs, you can find lots of sea creature fossils in those rocks. And so if you live in that area of our state, wherever you find, like rocks in the ground, just pick them up, start looking. And at the Geology Museum, we actually help people figure out what they've found too. So if that's something that, you're kind of stumped and you don't know what you found, you can always have a parent or a teacher email the museum and we can help you figure it out. So in Wisconsin, you can find those things that are older than dinosaurs. And then we also have Ice Age fossils here, so mastodons and mammoths. But those are more rare to find for sure. I know there have been kids that have found them though. We have a mastodon in the museum that you got to see in those videos, and the bones from that were found by kids. So that's Wisconsin, but like I'll let Dave and Aaron talk about other creatures and other places to find things.
Cool. I could talk about this one a little bit.
Sure.
I have much less experience than Dave does when it comes to going out and finding lots of fossils, but out in Wyoming, we've been working on this rock unit. So it's like a layer of rocks. It's called the Poposia Formation. It's notorious among geologists and like paleontologists for not having that many fossils. But weirdly enough, like Dave, the crew, and myself, we've gone out and we've found so many amphibian bones that we don't know what to do with all of them. It's becoming a little bit of a problem, but it's a good problem to have. So yeah, and one of those is going to be an entirely new species, so that's pretty cool. And we have like dozens of individuals of it, which is almost more exciting. But I'm actually working on the big amphibians, which are an already known species, but they've never been found in this area before. So that kind of helps us expand like where this type of fossil is found. And it can also help us figure out when these rocks were deposited, so how old they are. So yeah, and I'll let Dave
yeah, and this kind of goes in, I've seen a few questions scroll by, and it all kind of relates together, right? So the best place to find fossils, this is going to sound so silly, the best place to find fossils is where rocks exist that animals in that time used to live that got preserved, basically. So if you want to find Jurassic aged fossils, as Brooke was saying, you got to know what you're looking for or what kind of thing you want to find. And so I can limit it to Jurassic or Cretaceous or even Mesozoic, like the entire span of the dinosaurs. And I'll just use that as an example, but you could pick any time period. And you can look at maps, and geologists have spent their whole careers mapping out where certain formations exist. Usually those exist because out west, because if you imagine it's like a layer cake, sediments get deposited on top of each other. So the oldest ones are at the bottom, the youngest ones are at the top. The problem is that if you have this layer cake across the globe, well, everything that you're finding on the surface would be pretty young, except like where the Rocky Mountains are. And so you get this uplift, and the Rocky Mountains tilt everything up. And when they do that and erode, it exposes the rock that are really old and all the way down the sequence to the young rocks. So all the way around the Rocky Mountains. So that's why if you think of where the famous dinosaurs are found, it's the Dakotas, Montana, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado. So it literally is right down that stretch of the Rocky Mountain west. Not so much in Wisconsin, because we have just a hint of Cretaceous age rock right along the Mississippi border, but we have no dinosaurs from the state. But we do have spectacular faunas of, as Brooke was saying, of these older marine critters. So everywhere kind of has rock that preserves something in the geologic history. Even in the Canadian Shield, where it's all really, really, really old rock, well, they've got like meteorite impacts where you can see ejecta from the meteorites has been thrown around, and that's preserved. So you can see the little droplets from the impact. So there's all sorts of cool things that are always present wherever you are. But when you want to go find the big dinosaurs and stuff, it's mostly out west. And then some places down south even. You get some outcrops in Arkansas, and they have Cretaceous dinosaurs in Arkansas. Who knew? So all of that being said, yeah, it's knowing what the rocks are, the ages, and the geologists help work on figuring out what the age is. We can refine it, the age, based on the specimens, as Aaron was saying. So if we have a new taxa, well, we know those are always found in particular horizons or in association with other animals. And then there's another group of geologists who study the crystals in the rocks. And sometimes, depending on the kind of crystal, you can actually use really big equipment that you can see on tours whenever we can go back to tours on campus, where we do stuff like this, where we look at these rocks to figure out what the age is. In fact, UW-Madison's geology department has done work on the oldest crystals, the oldest zircons in the world, which is really cool.
And how, so yeah, so some, Rohan is wondering about the machines used to study fossils, and you can use these machines to actually just find out how old a rock would be. And so how old are these rocks, and how old are some of the fossils that you found?
Cool. Some of the ones that we've talked about, so what Aaron has mentioned with the big amphibians, all the stuff that we work in Wyoming, is around 230 million. And I'm going to say plus or minus a couple million years there, because we don't have those crystals yet that give us a really precise age. But we have animals that have been found in other places that are really closely related. that have had those crystals found. So we can kind of give it a rough boundary. And, it's a 5 million year span, which might sound like, that's the entire human origin story from early critters like that. 5 million years is a really long time. But that's actually a narrow window when you start looking 230 million years ago. So we don't have precise ages for those, but we can get pretty close. And I'm trying to think Aaron, did you have anything to add to that?
As far as the machines go, well, we use like a lot of different machines. We've actually been involved with some folks down in Australia, and they will take our fossil, or like we have very small amphibian fossils in burrows, and they scan them in a nuclear reactor with neutron beam tomography and synchrotron X-ray scanning, so we can get really, really fine detail of these really tiny animals inside their burrows without actually having to go in with the air scribes you saw in my video and breaking the rock off. Like, we can see inside, which is so cool. It takes some more work than just being able to see inside right away, but yeah, it's kind of amazing what we can do with the technology we have now.
And you can even take those things once you've prepared them on the computer and then save out the little 3D files and print them. I mean, when I started my career, I thought that was make-believe, but yeah, so we can literally look through rock, see things that you can't see otherwise, and then print them out. And so we can print out whole fossils that you never will see the original specimen because it's buried in rock. And that's pretty cool.
So I think maybe one last question before the last question. So with like 3D printing fossils and scanning fossils and different things, are all of the fossils that you can see in the museum real rock and real fossil bones? Or how can we learn about fossils without having the real thing?
Yeah, I think that, so when you come to the museum, or even in the videos that you saw in the museum, not all of the fossils that you saw up there are real dinosaur bone. And that's because we don't find every single piece of a skeleton when we dig them up. So like if you've ever seen Jurassic Park, there's some scene at the beginning where they're all working and cleaning off the bones and there's like a perfect skeleton laid out there. That doesn't happen. Super duper rare to find like articulated skeletons where all the bones are laid out just like the skeleton was when the animal died. And so when we excavate fossils, get them out of the ground, clean them off, put them back together, a lot of times there's missing parts. But the nice thing is that we're not the only people and scientists who study these creatures. So there are other scientists who maybe found the parts that we didn't find, and we can make a copy of that. So we call those replicas, where we've made a copy of a bone so that we can put it together with the real bones of our skeleton. So we're not just like inventing what these animals looked like. We're asking other scientists and comparing to figure out what our missing pieces would have looked like. And so, yeah, that's a big piece of it is, sharing information among different scientists.
And I actually have an example of a replica here. So one thing that's kind of interesting with replicas is like you can see something that there might only be one of. So this is a replica of a relative of T-Rex called Alioramus. The original one is in Wyoming, right, Dave?
Mongolia.
It's from Mongolia. Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Mongolia? Or?
I think it's back. You're right. Maybe Wyoming. I can't remember now.
So this is a replica. It wasn't painted or anything, so you just see it's plastic, but you can see like the teeth and like this is where the eye goes, and there's the nose up here. So it's kind of cool. You can see it. If you might not otherwise be able to see it if it wasn't a replica. So.
That's awesome.
Way of
and
sharing.
We've got like 1 minute left. So if you guys could go around and real quick, just say like your favorite thing about working with fossils, being a paleontologist, being a geologist.
All right, I guess we'll go in the same order. So I'd say my favorite thing, I love science fiction, and ironically, I don't do science fiction at all, but I love the idea of time travel. And so I feel like even though I don't have a time machine per se, I get to go out and really look at and try to see things that were happening 230 million years ago by studying the rocks, the plants, the animals, the chemistry in the rocks that tells us about the climate, and look at how climate changes and animal changes. And it's like when you do that, you can actually see it happening. And that's my job, is I have to describe that stuff happening long, long ago. So geology to me is the ultimate time machine on Earth.
For me, I really like the idea of finding something that no one's ever found before, or discovering something, figuring something out that no one's ever figured out before. Like that, you know, figuring something out new, that's so cool to me, which is why I want to do research. And that's in any kind of science, not just paleontology. You get to figure out something that no one's ever figured out before. And it's so cool.
And I like the storytelling part of it. I like, you know, right now I don't go out and find stuff on my own anymore. Dave and Aaron and that crew, they do that. But when they bring things back, part of my job is getting to tell the stories of what they found. And when people bring things to the museum and they're like, what is this? What is this rock? You know, maybe they thought it was a meteorite, and I have to tell them it's not a meteorite, but I get to tell them the story of that rock. And maybe it came from a volcano, and that's cool. So I like doing that. I like getting to tell the stories that rocks have.
Well, that's just wonderful. I think we should get out there and make more stories and get curious about finding out new things. So thank you everyone so much for joining us at the Wisconsin Science Festival. Thank you to our field trip presenters, Dave, Aaron, and Brooke from the University of Wisconsin Geology Museum. A recording of this field trip may be available, and we'll follow up with teachers about that. Remember that the Wisconsin Science Festival continues with events hosted from organizations across the state that you can participate in. Just check out wisconsinsciencefest.org for more fun science. We'll see you there.